y creamos el nombre de Pablo Escobar. Y él figura en el almanaque mundial como el asesino más grande civil del siglo XX. Pero él no mató personas, lo matamos nosotros.
The first time I killed someone was I was 26, 27.
He pulled out a handgun, told me to kill that person, the one kneeling in front of him, and I just shot him.
Getting cartel leaders to open up on camera isn't exactly easy because these are people who usually live in the shadows. But when they do speak, the stories they tell can be downright chilling, sometimes even traumatic. So let's talk about some of the most disturbing interviews with cartel leaders of all time.
José Vázquez Villagrana,
alias
Jabalí.
The story of Elabati is one that'll leave you in awe anytime you hear it. Elabati is a former member of the U.S. military. He joined in the year 1990, deserted a year after he got his U.S. citizenship, went back to Mexico, and became a chief operator of smuggling drugs into the U.S. Like for every ton of drugs smuggled, this guy probably had a hand in it. According to the interview you saw earlier, Elabati narrated in detail how he smuggled the drugs and which cartels he worked with. He first gets the shipment from Colombia, then sends it to Chiapas and then Oaxaca before transporting it to Sonora by air. At Sonora is a ranch that Elabati owns, and also where an aircraft carrying tons and tons of cocaine land. Then from there, Elabati and his men transport the shipment right into the U.S. This guy used to work for Beltran Leyva, but then when they had the partnership with the Zetas, he left and started working with El Chapo. However, working with Chapo earned him a one-way ticket to prison, after which he was captured at his ranch on February 21, 2010. In the video after his arrest, he discussed how every smuggler at the Sonora border was paid $1,000 for every successful shipment of cocaine smuggled into the U.S.
¿Hablaste algún día con el Chapo?
Por teléfono un día hablé con él,
¿Qué te dice?
que todo en paz, que se portaron bien, que esa área no se permitía que nadie cobrara plaza, ni secuestrara, ni robara, ni asaltara.
But that wasn't the case, because the violence around the border has claimed the lives of over 5,000 people.
¿Cuántas personas mató usted?
Yo calculo que de mi propia mano pasan 250 personas y tengo que ver pues, la muerte de 1,500 personas.
Popeye was one of Pablo Escobar's most trusted soldiers. However, in this interview with journalist Rafael Poveda, he talked about some of the deepest and darkest secrets about his time with Escobar and what it really meant to kill for the Colombian drug lord. But first, how exactly did Popeye even find himself working with the Medellin cartel? Well, Yon Ido Velasquez Vasquez, better known as Popeye, was born in 1962 in Yarumal, a small town in Colombia's Antioquia region. He grows up in a working-class family that didn't have much money. And during the 70s, Medellin, his home city, was becoming a hotbed for crime and drug activity. And Popeye, still a teenager, got caught up in the promise of fast money and power. Like many others at the time, he would look up to Pablo Escobar, the Medellin cartel's infamous boss, who by the 1980s controlled about 80% of the world's cocaine trade. So around 1984, when he was 22, Popeye joined the Medellin cartel. He starts off doing small but dangerous jobs like collecting debts and threatening rivals. But his total loyalty, ruthless efficiency, and willingness to do whatever he was told caught Escobar's eye. That got him promoted quickly, turning him into one of the cartel's top sicarios, their most feared hitman. According to Popeye himself, he personally killed about 250 people and helped plan the murders of thousands more. His targets would include police officers, judges, journalists, and politicians, or anyone seen as a threat to the cartel's grip on power. Popeye also earned his place in Escobar's inner circle by being involved in some of the cartel's boldest and deadliest attacks, like playing a key role in the 1989 bombing of Avianca Flight 203, which killed 107 people. Now, the goal was to kill presidential candidate Cesar Gaviria, who happened to survive. The attack showed how far the cartel was willing to go, though, even killing innocent people, even creating terrorism to protect their interests. Popeye would help plan the bombing at Bogota Shopping Mall in 1993. Another move against the Colombian government's efforts to extradite him to the U.S. Through these kinds of attacks and countless assassinations, Popeye had built a reputation as a cold-blooded but loyal enforcer. His nickname Popeye came from his sharp, cartoon-like appearance, skinny build, intense facial features, and a cocky swagger that disguised how deadly he really was. He carried out murders like it was a regular business deal, all done to protect Escobar, whom he saw as almost godlike. Even as the Colombian government, backed by U.S. forces, ramped up their campaign against the cartel in the early 90s, Popeye remained loyal. In 1991, when Escobar made a deal to be imprisoned in his own luxurious prison, La Catedral, Popeye helped with operations from the inside, and after Escobar escaped in 92, Popeye continued fighting on his behalf. Even as rival cartels like Cali and vigilante groups like Los Pepes started tearing the Medellin cartel apart. Los Pepes, made up of Escobar's enemies and allegedly supported by law enforcement, launched this brutal campaign, killing cartel members, destroying assets, and shrinking Escobar's circle of loyal followers. Popeye was one of the few who stuck with him, helping coordinate his attacks and avoid capture in Medellin's maze-like neighborhoods. But on December 2, 93, it all ended. Escobar was shot and killed on a rooftop by Colombian police, as the rumors say. And with his leader gone, the cartel collapsed and Popeye was left without a cause. Feeling defeated but still thinking clearly, Popeye surrenders in 1994. He's charged with a laundry list of crimes, including murder, terrorism, and drug trafficking, and ends up serving 23 years in prison. Now, behind bars, he would remain in the spotlight, unapologetic, detailed, and disturbingly open about his violent past. Now, he was released on parole in August 2014, and he would take on a strange new role as a public figure. He gave interviews, like the one with journalist Rafael Poveda, and even started a YouTube channel where he would talk about his time with the cartel, sometimes bragging, sometimes pretending to be sorry. In one interview with Poveda, Popeye talked about the reaction in Escobar's camp after he kidnapped former Colombian president Andrés Pastrana.
Cuando yo secuestré a Andrés Pastrana, el doctor Alberto Santovimio Botero fue a decirle a Pablo Escobar que ejecutara a Andrés Pastrana. Me felicitó a mí ahí de abrazo, porque de una llegó y le dijo a Pablo Escobar, le dijo, Pablo, ¿dónde está el héroe que secuestró a este tipo? Entonces mi ahí lo tiene al lado, el que lo recogió allá en el parque del poblado. Me abrazó, me felicitó el doctor Alberto Santovimio Botero.
And since he was one of the sicarios who spent time with Escobar at La Catedral, he gave a detailed account of what it was like to be on the inside.
Nombran una guardia nacional para darle legalidad a la catedral. Nombran una guardia municipal que son unos bandidos de Pablo Escobar vestidos de azul, bandidos asesinos todos. En el doble fondo entraba licor, teníamos armas dentro de la cárcel. De ahí se dieron cientos de órdenes de asesinato afuera.
His videos were a mix of disturbing confessions and insider gossip, stories about Escobar's charm, how murders were planned, and how the cartel worked behind the scenes. Some viewers were fascinated, others disgusted. But Popeye becomes one of the few Sicario insiders to share this level of detail. Still, his attempt to cash in on his criminal fame didn't sit well with everyone. In May 2018, he was arrested again, this time for extortion and conspiracy, accused of staying involved in criminal activity. Eventually, his story came to a close. Diagnosed with esophageal cancer, Popeye spent his final months locked up in a Bogotá prison. He died on February 6, 2020, at the age of 57. And whether or not people like it, he'll always be remembered as one of Pablo Escobar's most devoted and deadly killers. A man whose life mirrored the violent rise and fall of the Medellin cartel.
Il faut être réaliste. Nous sommes en train de vivre la civilisation de la cocaïne. La cocaïne est en train d'envahir le monde. Pourquoi est-elle en train de l'envahir? Parce qu'elle est une drogue moins forte, moins nuisible que d'autres.
Speaking of Escobar, many people haven't really seen interviews with him. Well, that is until now. Now, for those who don't know, Escobar was born on December 1st, 1949 in Rio Negro, Colombia, and grew up in a working-class neighborhood in Medellin. From a young age, he was an ambitious and street-smart kid, traits that would help him shape into a notorious drug lord. And as a teenager, he would start off with small crimes, like stealing cars, selling fake lottery tickets. By the 70s, though, he gets into a booming cocaine trade, and he quickly realizes how insanely profitable it could be. That's when he finds the Medellin cartel. And throughout the 1980s, his cartel grew into a drug empire that supplied up to 80% of the world's cocaine and made billions of dollars every year. At the height of its power, Escobar's fortune was estimated at around $30 billion, making him one of the wealthiest people on the planet at the time. Now, despite being brutal and violent, Escobar was incredibly strategic. He would pour money into Medellin's poorest neighborhoods, building schools, soccer fields, and housing, which earned him this Robin Hood reputation amongst its locals. But make no mistake, because he was ruthless if somebody stood in his way. Whether it be a cop, a judge, journalist, politician, or innocent bystander, he'd either bribe them or have them killed. He ordered thousands of murders to keep his power intact. His whole operation was built on fear and corruption. In 1982, he would manage to get elected to Colombia's Congress. But once his drug connections were exposed, his political dreams fell apart, and that only fueled his hatred for the government. By the late 80s, the US and Colombia teamed up, with the DEA and local forces teaming up on the cartel. Escobar responds with even more violence, car bombs, assassinations, chaos in general, hoping to pressure the government into negotiating. And in 1991, he did strike a deal. He was going to surrender as long as they didn't kick him out to the US. Now, that deal allowed him to live in La Catedral, which was his prison pretty much, a luxurious resort that he controlled completely. But in 1992, when the government had had enough, they moved in on him, and he escaped. From then on, he was a fugitive. Colombian police, US intel, and a brutal vigilante group called Los Pepes would all hunt him down. It was at that moment that his cartel began to collapse. Allies would get killed or turn on him. And then on December 2nd, 93, Escobar was found through a phone call and gunned down on a rooftop in Medellin. This guy was 44 years old, and with his death, his cartel essentially fell apart. But the story didn't end there. You see, after his death, several documentaries, books, and interviews with people from his inner circle began revealing what Escobar really thought about the future of cocaine. And according to those close to him, and even Escobar himself, he believed that cocaine would one day be legalized around the world. And in this particular interview from the French documentary,
Le problème des drogués est un problème de manque d'éducation et de discipline. C'est pareil avec l'alcool. Il n'y a aucune différence entre un homme couché sur le trottoir parce qu'il est ivre et un drogué.
he never saw prohibition as something permanent nor morally right, but rather as a temporary political decision. In his view, the U.S. didn't condemn cocaine because it was dangerous, but because it couldn't control the highly profitable drug trade coming out of Latin America.
Le traité d'extradition signé en 1979 avait pour but d'attaquer les exportateurs de marijuana. Mais les Nord-Américains, aujourd'hui, produisent la marijuana eux-mêmes et la vendent. Alors, actuellement, c'est la cocaïne qui est dangereuse. C'est elle le mal, parce qu'elle échappe au contrôle des Américains, parce que ce sont les Colombiens qui la produisent. C'est ça le problème fondamental.
Escobar often portrayed himself as someone standing up to American dominance, just a businessman supplying a product people wanted. And these ideas started to gain more attention in the 2000s and 10s, especially through media like TV specials and narco-themed shows. They added a deeper, more defiant layer to his already controversial legacy. So, while many critics saw these claims as excuses for the violence and terror he caused, Escobar believed that, in time, people would see him as someone ahead of his time, someone who saw a world where cocaine wasn't illegal. But whether he was a rebellious entrepreneur or just hiding his greed behind anti-American talk, the reality remains. Escobar's empire left a devastating mark on Colombia. This is Ali Gonzalez, a former sicario for a notorious Mexican cartel. Gonzalez grew up in Mexico but moved on to Southern California with his parents at a young age. Now, growing up, he was introduced to a lot of gang violence due to the presence of gangs all around his area. But the real reason he got into cartel business is far more depraved.
How did it kind of happen that you got involved in crime?
So my father, basically, he raped my sister when we were young. The stress of seeing that obligated me to try to kill him.
His father ends up doing 16 years, while his mother barely has enough money to put food on the table, forcing a very young Gonzalez to begin pushing drugs.
Cartel de Sinaloa is one of the biggest ones in Mexico. went to Sonora and I worked for the Sinaloa as well as a hitman. I worked in Morelos as well for another organization called La Familia Michoacana.
Gonzalez goes on to say how the cartels he worked for intimidated people with violence.
Maybe this person took money away from the cartel, or they got involved in businesses where they didn't come through. In order to make sure that other associates don't follow the same route, they put them as an example.
Then he was asked about the most violent thing he'd ever done, and his response shocked even the interviewer.
I basically went up to him and smashed him with the butt of the rifle until his head exploded, and that was it.
Gonzalez got convicted of murder in Mexico and was given 30 years in prison. And although he spent 3 years, his experience there was on a whole different level.
The cells can go anything from 11 inmates to, I've seen 16 in one cell that is meant for 4 people.
And here's the crazy part.
There was 14 people killed. The main boss was hated, and they were playing basketball with his head.
That's one hell of a sight to imagine. But to his own luck, Gonzalez managed to stay alive despite all the prison riots and violence. And once he got early release from prison, he decided to leave the whole cartel life behind. He took whatever little cash he had, steals a vehicle from his superiors, and drives out of Mexico into freedom.
What's done is done, you know? And I think that I wouldn't change anything in my life because it makes me the person that I am today.
¿Cuál es la verdad de su participación en el episodio de Pablo Escobar?
Bueno, a ver, yo le cuento desde un principio cómo.
That was Gilberto Rodriguez Orejuela, giving his very detailed story about the life of Pablo Escobar in the Medellin cartel before Pablo died. Now, in 1975, Gilberto, alongside his brother, Miguel Rodriguez Orejuela, and another drug dealer, Jose Santa Cruz Lodoño, they would form the Cali cartel, and they start off by selling marijuana. But when Pablo and the Medellin cartel began exploiting the very lucrative cocaine trade, they decided to enter that market as well. And at first they would all work together as one big cartel. But over time, personal greed begins to kick in and animosity grows between them. But regardless, Gilberto knew a lot about Escobar and how he tried to save his family in the final days leading up to his death. So after Escobar's death, Gilberto and the Cali cartel take full control of the cocaine market in Colombia. They supply now 80% of the U.S. cocaine trade through Rodriguez's son, Jorge Alberto Rodriguez, and 90% of the European cocaine market as well. However, his glory days and that of his cartel were very short-lived. He was captured 2 years after Escobar's death and was extradited to the U.S. in 2004. Then in 2006, both Gilberto and his brother Miguel are sentenced to 30 years in prison after pleading guilty to charges of conspiring to import cocaine to the U.S. And in May 2022, Gilberto died at a prison medical center at the age of 83.
We are all bad guys. That's the reality. Why? Because at the end of the day, the work is the same.
Like we said as we go down this list, these cartel members just get more intensified. What you just saw is one of the rarest cartel interviews you'd probably come across on the internet. This is a high-ranking leader of the CJNG, New Jalisco Generation Cartel, and his name is Ricardo Ruiz, aka Doble Ara. Now, Ricardo here started his criminal career in the town of Jalisco, but later on expanded to Michoacán, Guanajuato, and Zacatecas. He's the one many say are responsible for spreading and filming all those disturbing videos of CJNG members displaying their weapons. So if you've ever been traumatized by these videos, you can blame it on this guy, I guess. But jokes aside, this man's extremely dangerous. I mean, you don't need us to tell you that he's a freaking leader in the CJNG. I mean, these guys are ruthless. This guy's linked to the death of the Secretary of Tourism in Jalisco, Jose de Jesus Gallegos Alvarez, and he is said to be under the command of Juan Carlos Valencia Gonzalez, who in turn is considered the creator of the elite groups at the service of El Mencho. Double R has done some damage in the territories he's controlled. However, for someone so tough, His arrest was, and probably still is, one of the easiest of all crime lords in Mexico. Double R is fond of throwing some of the best parties for narco corrido singers who write ballads about drug traffickers and their trade. He likes to invite guests like Luis R. Conriquez, who authorities refer to as the CJNG's exclusive singer. The Mexican army had a close eye on this musician's movements, and after intel revealed he was going to this party at a hidden ranch, the Mexican government still stays quiet until 2 months later, when they head down to arrest Double R. He's successfully captured, but his men do fight back, leading to his release. So Double R's still a loose cannon out there and is ready to shoot down anybody on the order of the CJNG.
Contenido de esta entrevista es exclusivo para la señorita Kay del Castillo y el señor Sean Penn.
It's very rare to see a drug lord willingly show himself on camera, and it's rarer to see the greatest drug lord in all of Mexico openly do a video describing his childhood to the public. Mr. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, arguably one of the greatest drug lords of all time, openly agreed to a public interview. El Chapo's the man who grew the Sinaloa cartel into one of the most established drug trafficking organizations in Mexico. At its prime, it was responsible for 80% of the cocaine going into the U.S. And at some point, Forbes' list named El Chapo as one of the richest men in the world, with his cartel raking in billions of dollars annually. And aside from that cartel stuff, El Chapo was really good at breaking out of prison. So in 2014, El Chapo's lawyers get in contact with Kate del Castillo, a well-known Mexican actress. Kate writes an open letter to Guzman in 2012, expressing sympathy and asking him to spread love instead of dealing drugs. El Chapo was a fan and wanted to have this exclusive interview with her. However, Kate turned him down. Later in 2015, Kate and some guy named Sean Penn agreed to do this interview with El Chapo in the mountains of Sinaloa. However, that interview gave the DEA and the Mexican Armed Forces intel on the location and whereabouts of El Chapo, leading to his third and final arrest and extradition to the U.S.
Once a thief, always a thief. They say once a gangster, always a gangster. Once a gangster, always a gangster.
You think?
See.
That was Jose Manuel Martinez, aka the Black Hand. He's a former Mexican cartel hitman who's said to have killed 36 different people. Now, Martinez's mother got separated from his biological father and got remarried to his stepfather, who's a renowned drug lord named Pedro Fernandez. So following in his stepfather's footsteps, Martinez worked for different cartels and killed people on command. He was a different type of killer. He would kill without thinking twice. However, Martinez was arrested in May 2013 for the murder of Jose Ruiz, a friend of his daughter's boyfriend. While he was interrogated by Alabama authorities, Martinez does something crazy. He confesses to killing 36 people across at least 12 states without any pressure. All of his victims were adult men. He would also say that most of his murders were related to debts to Mexican drug cartels. In the state of Alabama, he was charged with 1 count of first-degree murder for the killing of Jose Ruiz and was sentenced to 50 years in prison. Then he was extradited to California, where he pled guilty to 9 counts of murder in October 2015 and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. And trust us when we say, giving Manuel Martinez a life sentence came after a long deliberation by the jury. More than a dozen of Martinez's family members came for his hearing to talk about how he's a good man and the sacrifices he made to protect his siblings.
¿A qué te dedicas?
Al narcotráfico.
¿Para qué organización?
Para los Zetas.
Enrique, alias El Mamito, is the former leader of one of the most brutal Mexican cartels, Los Zetas. It is unusual seeing this kind of cartel leader granted an interview with the press because of how dangerous they usually are. But in this case, El Mamito was granted one, allowing us to see this cold, emotionless side to him. I mean, what did we expect? This guy has ordered the hits of hundreds and hundreds of innocent people around Mexico. And just like other drug lords before him, El Mamito was once part of the Mexican army. He joined in 1993, but after 3 years, he was assigned to the Special Forces Air Mobile Group. Then he kept climbing the ranks until '99, when he finally deserted the Army. However, less than a year later, he was invited by Arturo Guzman de Sena, known as Z1, to be part of this 14-man special team that formed Los Zetas. And if you ever thought that Los Zetas were some brutal, skilled killers, well then you should thank Mr. El Mamito here for that one, because he oversaw the paramilitary training of new recruits. He would train them like fighting for World War III or some alien freaking invasion. I mean, you get the point. And then, he also oversaw the Gulf Cartel's trafficking activities in the state of Coahuila, along with Alejandro Trevino Morales. El Mamito was solely responsible for multi-ton shipments of marijuana and multi-kilogram shipments of cocaine from Mexico to the U.S. And when it came to staining his hands with blood, El Mamito coordinated a failed raid on a max security prison, El Altiplano, in this attempt to free his boss, Ociel Cárdenas Guillén. He planned on using 3 choppers and 50 Zetas members to break Ociel Guillén out of prison. But I guess only El Chapo can pull off that type of prison escape. Now eventually on July 4th, 2011, El Mamito was captured in a Mexico City suburb without firing a shot. They extradited him to the U.S. for drug trafficking and organized crime charges. And of course, is now serving life imprisonment.
Yo culpable no, porque nunca le he hecho yo daño a nadie. Remordimiento tampoco, porque yo no he hecho nunca mal. Dolor sí, porque he perdido muchos amigos.
Sandra Avila Beltran, aka the Queen of the South, is a former Mexican drug dealer who has done her time behind bars. Now she's the daughter of Maria Luisa Beltran Felix and is related to Rafael Caro Quintero, former leader of the Guadalajara Cartel. Sandra was already part of the drug trafficking trade that her parents and relations were heavily involved in. So as a young adult, she would date several well-known drug lords in Mexico, married twice, with both her husbands being ex-police commanders, who eventually became drug traffickers. However, Sandra gained her notoriety in narcotics after getting into a relationship with one of the major cocaine suppliers from Colombia, Juan Diego Espinoza Ramirez, aka the Tiger. Mr. Tiger here was one of the leaders of the Colombian Norte de Valle cartel, one of the major ones that were shipping cocaine to Mexico before it was smuggled into the U.S. Soon enough, Sandra began shipping cocaine into the U.S. through the use of speedboats off the coast of the U.S. border, streamlining millions of dollars into her pockets, and also earning her name, Queen of the South. But in 2001, everything came crashing down when police found 9 tons of cocaine on a ship in the Pacific port of Manzanillo, Colima. That was linked back to Sandra and her lover. And then again in 2002, Sandra unexpectedly contacted authorities for help when her teenage son was kidnapped for a $5 million ransom. She paid that ransom. But since she was already under investigation by police, the Mexican authorities began questioning her source of income. And well, it didn't take much to put all those pieces together, which led to her arrest on September 28, 2007, along with her partner, Espinoza Ramirez. She was extradited to the U.S. in 2012 for her involvement in that 9 tons of cocaine that was traced back to her. She was then given 70 months in prison, but was eventually released in just 4 and deported back to Mexico. We don't know why the U.S. did that, but the Mexican government wasn't going to let that one slide. She was rearrested, charged with money laundering, and sent to 5 more years imprisonment. Lucky for her though, she was released in 2015 and now lives a normal life in Guadalajara.